Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Natalie inRenaissance podcast. And so far I've talked a lot about thought, self-talk, identity, and performance. And while I do have a lot of specific things I want to get to, especially for all of you listening for more musical or more practical things, don't worry, those things are on my agenda. But I do want to set up this stage well. And so as I continue to build out future episodes, you'll know that everything I have said has been in this relational, contextual way, starting from these core points that I have found are really foundational in teaching and being an artist and learning more from life. And so as we continue this journey of saying, who am I? What do I value? What's important to me? And what do I want from life? And what is even my own opinion about this? All these questions, we know they don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in life because we are relational beings who make up communities and circles of people. So as we go out and we interact with others, neighbors, family members, our soul is interacting with other souls. And our identities are intersecting with other identities. And a couple things can happen, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But as I've talked about our self-talk, what we believe about ourselves, what we believe is possible for ourselves, it interacts with other people's as well. And so our self-talk is intersecting with other people's self-talk. And there are obviously different levels of self-talk, some positive, some negative. And so in that interaction, it's really interesting, especially because as a teacher and artist, my work is people-centered. And every day is an adventure for me in the sense that I never know who I'm going to meet, who I'm going to work with. So in working a people business, it makes life extremely interesting, but it can also be exhausting. And I don't know about you, but these days I'm very cognizant of my energy. And I think that this really started happening for me in the quarantine, sort of lockdown moments of COVID, when being out and about and being around so many people that came to a standstill. And it was this season of quiet. And I grew up an extrovert, but I really think that in that time of just having a lot of alone time and having more quiet moments, I think that I became an introvert, which has been kind of interesting in just thinking about who I am as a person. But in this time, I became so much more aware of the energy that I had. And when things started to resume and the coffee meetings and normal life sort of came back in full swing, I was just astounded at, wow, did I actually live life this way, this sort of crazy pace? And so I made a lot of decisions, made a lot more boundaries for myself in protecting my energy. And so I think being honest about what season of life that you're in and the energy that you have, I think, based on your priorities, I think it's important to acknowledge. And my season of life could be very different from yours, and the energy that you have could be different from the energy of mine. But no matter what that is, being in charge of our own energy and maintaining balance in that is so important. And as we interact with others, and as we notice the environments that we are in, we just need to really take inventory of the energy that we're using and also ask our questions, does this give energy back to me? The value that I bring and that I provide, am I receiving that as well? And so as we move forward, moving from an individual more into interacting with others, I think there are 3 things that happen. One is where you are taking energy in the form of a chameleon personality, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Number 2, being in a state of overgiving, where you feel like you're a negativity target. And the 3 is a state of balance, where you find your people and you find your support group. So I'm going to start off talking about the 2 imbalances first, and then the third one, I will talk about being in balance. So the first imbalance is where you don't have enough energy inside of you, and so you seek to take that from others by being around them, by relying on their opinions about everything, depending on them for everything. That is really being in a taking energy. It's very much a form of consumer culture. And we've heard a lot about consumer culture in terms of materialism or shopping sprees or being at the mercy of all the influences or the current trends. And the thing about being in the chameleon personality is that you can very easily fall into being in an over-influenced state, right? If you accept everything that's around you, you're going to accept things that were never meant for you. And of course, this can show itself in many different areas, but one of them is in the form of the advice that we take. And I now have a very funny view of advice because what I've come to realize is that no one knows me better than I know myself, and not everyone has the same value system. We all have different definitions of what success is, how we should each run our lives. And so in seeking advice from other people, just knowing that in the back of one's mind really, really helps. I think the key word here is context. And let's say that I just did a 3-mile hike and, maybe I asked someone, what workout should I do at the gym? If they say leg day, rather than just doing leg day, I just have to think, okay, well, I just did this very strenuous exercise. I'm going to work a different muscle group and maybe later on go back and do leg day. It could be, wow, what should the next career step be for me? And maybe someone says, oh, you should move to this city and pursue this. But what they really don't see is that, I'm psychologically and emotionally burned out, and the last thing I need to do is pursue another challenge, right? And so knowing the context is so, so important, because when you realize that we're all different people who have different paths to walk, it frees you from having to be in this consumer mindset to being in a creator mindset. And, as someone who basically developed her own career path, someone who has done a lot of things on her own, I think this has really helped me in limiting how I seek out other people or being very clear in how I need their assistance. And it also has taught me to just value my own input. And that has meant more than you know. And it's not only valuing my input as a learner, as a teacher, but also just as a human being. And it's freeing in that sense because no one is going to help you better than you can help yourself. And if you do have a weakness, you have a very targeted area when you can go and approach someone. And of course, giving context is very useful if it's like a business help, something very specific. But again, there's no need to be dependent on other people. And honestly, one of the best joys of my personal journey has been to be in a creator mindset where I am creating my own life. I am creating my beliefs. I am creating my own projects. And the more you create, the less you want to consume. And that has been one of my personal joys. And it's something that I discovered and something that I found because I think consumers will always be at the mercy of someone else. And so if you can flip that script somehow to whatever it is, it could be in any area of life, but trying to be more of a creator, more of an initiator, someone who honors and respects your own values. No one can do that better than you. So the second imbalance I want to talk about now is when you have this amazing self-talk, you have this amazing positive energy, you're creating things. The other imbalance that you can find yourself in is that you feel like you are attracting so much negative energy to yourself, and you just find yourself where you're having to give and overgive. And it's really funny where, I think opposites attract. And so I have found, as a positive person who is very optimistic, who leans to taking action, I encounter a lot of conflict. And, I think working with people, it happens, and conflict is not a bad thing. I think conflict, happens whenever someone is trying to build something worthwhile, or it could be a relationship, but it's just when people get close to you, when you're working with others, tension is bound to happen. But it's how you move through that, how you interpret that, that will make it positive or negative. So I don't think conflict in itself is a positive or negative thing. I think the way that things move forward, or if they move backward, or how events are interpreted, I think that's where, this association of positive or negative can be. But as I've mentioned, that when people are giving advice, when people are interacting with others, their self-talk is really on display. And so I know that I love travel, as I've said many times before, and I can't tell you how many conversations I have had with people, of course, who they don't know me, they don't know my soul very well, and they don't know where I'm going. But I can't tell you how many conversations I've had that were negative about travel, where, people are just depending on what they see on the news, they're depending on the hearsay, and they haven't gone to specific places, they don't have friends of certain nationalities, and quite frankly, they don't know me. And maybe in the past, it would have upset me a lot more. Another sort of scenario is, when I was in music school telling people who I had known from childhood that I wanted to be a piano teacher, getting a music degree. There were so many people who sort of laughed and said, wow, how ambitious you are, you're never going to make money from this degree, and just having a really negative and pessimistic view of the arts, and of, being a small business owner and all these things. And to be honest, I had held on to those words for a very long time. And it's funny because I think at some point I realized that I was keeping all of these negative things very close to me, replaying them a lot, but I wasn't really keeping the positive things as close. And so there was a point where I just said, why is this of value to me? In my own way, I have proved these people wrong, and why I felt the need to do that to make a point. That was like a personal moment for me. But in thinking about all those conversations now, I realized that these people were only telling me these things from their own self-image and from the fears that they have, and it's an evidence of their own personal self-talk. And when I realize that, and I encounter conflict, I encounter people who bring this negative energy, I can have compassion, and I can also detach from these words, because they're not meant for me, right? They're not coming from a place that's even related to me. It's really a projection of what the other person thinks and how they feel about certain situations, but it's not necessarily reality. And when you realize that you're engaging with this person's self-talk or their self-image, you are really absolved of the responsibility of trying to make the situation better, of trying to make the conversation better. And I think that so many of us are overtrained to overdo the good, right? And you're trying to convince someone that this is good for them, or you're trying to assure them that, the idea is okay, or, whatever. I think you have the freedom to just let that go when you realize that the conversation is really not about you. It sort of can feel that way, but you just have to remember that the conversation is really just evidence of where the other person is in life, and also of their self-image. And so this has really helped me in not taking things so literally, not taking things personally, in letting things go. And in the end, it really is protecting my own energy instead of extending my energy to someone who is not ready to receive it or doesn't want my energy. I can then take that energy back and put it and reinvest it in something that will bring me life. And so it's not that the person is bad for not wanting my energy, it just doesn't fit. And so as we encounter conflict, just being able to evaluate things sort of in a non-judgmental way and just say, this is providing value to me, or is this taking away my energy? And I think that, again, people who are overgiving, people who are very empathetic, very hypersensitive, they want to make sure they're doing everything they can to make the other person happy. Again, it's not your responsibility because all of these things go back to, someone's self-image, especially in conversation or when you're talking about the future. And if you have these big goals, not everyone's self-image has room for big goals. And just accepting that and just realizing that has been of great freedom to me. And so being aware of this imbalance in energy where you could be in a negative environment around negative people, instead of overextending your energy and thinking that it will help everything, just maybe consider that going the opposite direction and conserving some of your own energy for you, protecting your peace. That would be the right step for you at this moment. So I've talked about our self-talk, interacting with others, and the two imbalances. And so now I want to talk about finding your people. And I just think this is such a beautiful moment where, we call them the soul sisters, or you find a kindred spirit where you're talking to someone and suddenly you're best friends. And this is when it could be in conversation, it could be just in being in relationship with someone, but you just find your people. And it really has to do with giving and taking, where, the energy, it matches. And it doesn't mean that you agree about every single thing, but you have similar operating systems where you don't necessarily have matching beliefs, but the approach is the same. It's very generous. It's very discussion-based, very open-minded, full of respect, and nothing that anyone says is taken as a threat. And this is so life-giving, and this is something where growth and learning, community, compassion, it's inevitable. And so as I keep thinking about the energy that I have as a human being in this season, as someone who has gifts, as someone who has a calling, I now am so careful with my energy, who I spend time around, very careful to monitor. Am I a consumer? Am I a creator? Am I in an imbalance, or am I in balance? Because thinking about this has really helped me, and I think it will help you too. Thank you so much for listening today. Leave a rating and a review. Follow me on Instagram if you're not already, at Natalie inRenaissance. Have an amazing day. Protect your energy.